Hello and welcome to the Angelica Tracker Show. This is Brian. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Good, good. I have some questions about your performing journey, and I would like to know, when did you start learning to play drums?
So I started in 2007 during the summer going into my first year of high school. And originally, I just wanted it to be something that it was just an activity to do over the summer. So I found a cheap $300 drum set on Amazon, got it in the mail, was super excited, and the first day I built the drum set, my brother came down with what are called drum tabs for this song For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica, because at the time, I really loved Metallica and metal bands like that, Megadeth and things. And so I just wanted to play some music. And my brother already was a guitar player, and I didn't want to copy him, sibling rivalry. So I started playing drums. And after a year of doing that, I then decided to take it a little more seriously. So I started taking lessons at a local music shop, and kind of just went from there. And it just took off through this. So
Yeah, that's awesome. When did you know you wanted to play the drums professionally?
it's hard to say. I knew that after my first performance, I wanted to do it forever, whether in a professional capacity or not. I didn't know I wanted to go into it fully until I decided to go to college for it, which was my senior year of high school. Because originally I had actually wanted to potentially join the military, maybe be in the Air Force, but I wanted to be a pilot for a long time. And then I decided I wanted to play drums just a little bit more than that, so I went into that instead.
Oh, that's awesome. Where did you go to college for music?
Northeastern Illinois University, so I was a percussion performance major, and graduated in 2015. And that was a great experience, because as someone who plays, drum set, primarily, I play a lot of progressive rock and metal and things like that. But at Northeastern, if you're someone who's going into music, it's a great opportunity to play things you wouldn't normally. So I spent a long time playing, ragtime xylophone solos and blues on vibraphone, and cello suites on the marimba, playing with the choirs and the orchestras, arranging for weird ensembles like maybe, a bass player, a saxophone player, and just a percussionist or something like that. So it's a great opportunity to do things that aren't this, but it's one of the only places to do something that's not this, and then to really dive into it. And the professors at Northeastern were definitely what sold the experience too, because they're all super knowledgeable and amazing, and it's a great way to discover other perspectives about music that's not just, I'm going to play Metallica, because then you get sort of crystallized in that, whereas this gave me a million different perspectives on how to approach just this or maybe different things. So it opened up a lot of doors, creatively, musically, academically, all kinds of things. So.
And did you ever play any other instruments besides drums, or?
I did. In fifth grade, I played oboe for about 3 months, and then I chewed through the reed, and it stopped working, so I was only renting it and taking these group lessons at my elementary school. And then after a few months, I just decided I didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, then you found the drums eventually.
A few years later, yeah.
Years.
And some friends of mine also had played drums, so they had this little drum set set up at this youth center we used to go to, and we'd jam on. We didn't know what we were doing. We would jam on it, and I thought, well, going into drumming, I knew one beat that a friend of mine taught me, so I was like, well, I sort of know how to do that. I'll try that out. So that's kind of what led to it.
And what was your first time performing like?
It was nerve-wracking. It was for my high school's annual variety show, and I was 6, 7, maybe 8 months into being a drummer. And we played. We got a chance to play one song. We auditioned. We made it in. It was myself, my brother who played guitar, and our friend David who played bass. And we played a Joe Satriani song, which is an instrumental, like, guitar solo rock song. And we made it in. We got a 2-minute slot to go on there and play some for a couple minutes, and then that was it. And it was absolutely nerve-wracking, because I just turned 15, and I was about to go on stage for the first time doing something I've never done in front of anybody before, in front of 1,200 people 5 times. So even hearing whatever the act was right before us, every time, for like a year, every time I would hear that song afterward, I would start to get nervous.
Wow.
Not like it was PTSD, but it was like, I gotta get it. Almost, I Pavloved myself into being like ready to perform after hearing this song. Not that seriously, but but yeah, initially it was nerve-wracking, but then after a couple times I thought to myself, like, I want to do this forever, because there's this glory, I guess, in it, of being on stage, but it's just like, at the time it was, I developed this talent from almost nothing, spending 8 hours a day in my basement, literally 8 hours a day during that first summer, practicing, learning how to do this thing, and then all of a sudden I'm in front of 1,200 people. I'm playing this song, and then they're all applauding and they love it. So I'm like, that's, it's kind of like when you're running and you get the runner's high. It's almost like a performer's high. And so for some performers, maybe they chase that sort of performer's high, but for me, it brings this sort of satisfaction and fulfillment. Like, I'm moving the audience to such a degree that they're loving what I'm doing. So I'm just going to keep doing it.
Yeah,
So-
that's a pretty big audience for a first time ever
Yes.
performance.
For a 14-year-old with just your brother and your friend on stage, it was huge at the time.
Wow.
So after that we kept looking for other any opportunity to perform, playing like open mic at the American Legion or friends parties or things like that. Wherever we could, we tried to get as many performance opportunities as we could. And it was funny back then, none of the three of us could sing. So it was all instrumental rock music because we couldn't sing. So we tried to, so that's a hard thing because a lot of instrumental music involves a lot of keyboards or a second guitar player, where bass, guitar, drums, we're just a trio, none of us can sing. There's not a lot of music out there that's fit for that specific ensemble. So that was another difficult thing about that time, was not a lot of places wanted an instrumental group because they want vocals. Well, we couldn't sing, so that was another challenge back then.
Did you ever have a singer do gigs with you, or you mainly were just all instrumental the full time?
At that time, it was instrumental. It wasn't until them two had graduated, Rick and David, and then I started another band for my junior and senior year, where I suddenly got guitar, bass, drums, keyboard, and a vocalist, and we went and played a Battle of the Bands and placed in the top 3. And then that was a rather short stint. But eventually, I was like, well, a bunch of my drum heroes play and sing at the same time. Why don't I try that too? Which, if you can sort of see, there's a microphone pointing. If I were to sit back there, you can see the microphone there. I've been trying that since the latter half of high school and well into college, and even started taking vocal lessons. That's a whole nother story. But so I also eventually decided, it's really hard to find a vocalist, especially for rock and metal these days. Why don't I just try singing myself?
Yeah, that's
So,
awesome. So
yeah.
do you sing sometimes now also?
Yes, absolutely. So with that band, which eventually became, with my brother, eventually became known as Player Blue, for the first couple years, my brother and I were splitting lead vocals on certain songs. So he would do a verse, I would do a pre-chorus, we would do the chorus together, stuff like that. And eventually, I just did all the leads myself. And in the current main project I'm in is a band called Diam Morte, where I also do some backup vocals, because we have several lead vocalists. But I do some backups there because I figure I'm back there anyway. I know how to do it. I can do it fairly well. Let's give it a shot. So we did a performance last November in Wisconsin, and it worked pretty well. So, and I even got to sing leads on one of the songs because one of our vocalists was not there.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
And do you have a favorite performance?
Favorite performance. I'll give you a top 3.
Top 3,
it's hard.
perfect,
It's
yeah.
hard to pick one. In that top 3, I would say is that first performance I did with Diam Morte in last November, because it's finally a really full ensemble that plays music that I totally love, which is, for the audience's sake, it's symphonic progressive metal. And so it's a metal band, but it also has a backing track that involves orchestra, brass. There's some choir moments, and it's drumming that really challenges me. But it was it's this really big, grandiose thing, and I really loved it. And it was also the first time I'd ever played on this kit while reading charts in front of me. So if you were actually there, because I hadn't memorized the music yet, but I figured, well, it's opera. We were playing the Diam Morte album called The Red Opera. I figured, well, it's opera. I've played operas before. I'm reading sheet music. I asked the band leader, Drake, hey, can I just read the sheet music? And he said, sure, okay. So I'm reading, for the first time ever live, these drum charts of standard notation that I had to transcribe the whole album and then put it out in these big sheets of paper and just flipping through it as we were going. So that was definitely one of them. Another one was my last semester at Northeastern. There was a production of Carmina Burana, and if you've been in the choir, opera, vocal scene, you'll know that one because it's a big piece. It's this big, long, 45-minute to an hour piece, multi-movement, and at the time, to play that piece properly, you would need 6, 7, 8 percussionists. Well, the second performance of it, which was at a cathedral in Chicago, we had 2 percussionists. So I told the other percussionist, a friend of mine, Kyle, go play timpani and I'll try to do everything else as much as I can. So instead of just reading one line, I was reading a whole score of percussion parts, and I had the percussion. There was a bass drum, a gong, a xylophone, bells, a snare drum, all these other things surrounding me, and I just tried to play all of it as much as I could. And I think the crazy part was we were actually off stage, so the director, instead of seeing him conduct straight this way, it was almost to the side and behind him, because we were like right in front of the audience. But it was super challenging, and it ended up being an awesome performance. The director said it sounded great. He said it sounded better than when there were more percussionists present. So I must have done something right. So that was definitely one of mine. It was I like that one because it was to have a full orchestra with a choir, percussion section, all that is one of the largest ensembles I've ever played with, and it sounded amazing, and it was super challenging because I love being challenged. I love because when the music is challenging, I'm super in the zone and I'm super focused, and I have to be 100% conscious the entire time. There's no spacing out, and so that's music that I love doing, where it's every second of it you're in the zone and you're happening, and you have to be to make it work.
When did you join Diam Morte?
So I joined last spring. I was approached by Drake directly last April, May, and the original idea was I was going to just be their live drummer. And then about a month into that, they decided, hey, why don't we're recording a new album called The Black Ballad, why don't we also have you write and record the drums for those? And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. Originally, Drake had sought out recommendations from other people. I'm also in this band called Erico, which one of the guitar players, Matt, is also the guitar player for Diam Morte. So he technically initially approached me to see if I was interested. I said yes, and then Drake reached out, and I played a couple songs. Where the Light Grows Cold and A Scarlet Mercy, those were my audition songs. I sent those in, really liked it, and then we've just been going from there. So I spent last summer, fall, writing and recording, collaborating with Drake, and then officially finished tracking the drums last December. So now after that I handed everything off to them. So now there's a couple guitar players doing their stuff, the vocalists are doing their things. Now with Diam Morte, it's pretty interesting. There's an orchestral album and then there's a metal album.
Oh wow.
Now I'm playing drums on the metal album. The orchestral album is like 99% the same thing as the metal album, except the metal album incorporates the vocals, the guitars, there's bass in there, and the drumming. So the orchestral album was released digitally last year, I believe. Might have that wrong, but it's definitely going to be coming out with the actual campaign, which I'll get to in a second, and the metal album. We're anticipating this May is when it's coming out. Now, the interesting thing about The Black Ballad is it's the first concept album I've ever played on, and I love concept albums. If you're into progressive rock, bands like Pink Floyd, Yes, Rush, Genesis, Dream Theater, Symphony X, bands like that, they have these things called concept albums where the whole album is either it's a story, or there's a narrative, or there's a generalized theme for the album. For The Black Ballad and the Red Opera, the previous album, it's the story of a D&D campaign for Dungeons and Dragons, like tabletop gaming. So the Black Ballad is the campaign sequel to the Red Opera, and that's super cool to me. So basically, when the campaign comes out in May, also the music albums will come out. So the idea is, while people are playing it, they can play the music in the background or something like that. But yeah, there's a whole booklet, there's a storyline, there's characters, and in the live performance, the 4 vocalists we have are also singing the parts of the characters in the campaign. So Now, I don't have a character at the moment. I'm Bryan, the drummer, but I do some backup vocals, not on the recording, but live. So who knows? Maybe I'll have a character in the future works. You know, whether it happens or not, that's okay. I've got my work cut out for me as it is. So the album itself is one campaign.
One campaign.
Yeah. So there's just those two. Because I haven't heard a lot of the Black Ballad. I haven't really heard the completed product yet because it's still being recorded. I can't really say, but I do really love the Red Opera.
The Red Opera.
It's even if I wasn't in the band, I would still love it because it is a great album, and I've got a feeling that the Black Ballad's going to be just a little bit even better than that. There's a little bias in there, actually, because I'm blank. But it's I think even better because the Red Opera was mostly programmed drums. Whereas the Black Ballad, it's me and Drake. He had certain drumming ideas that he sent me, and I reworked a lot of them. We kind of sent some back and forth. I made some demos. He approved them, and then I recorded it. So it's the drumming in Diam Morte finally has a human element, which I think will allow listeners to connect with it even just a little more, kind of grounds it a little more. So, yeah. We'll see.
Definitely.
So I guess to answer your question, I don't have a favorite.
You don't have a favorite?
No.
And you also teach. What age levels do you usually teach?
Mostly high school, but some middle school.
Some middle school?
So I teach marching band at a couple of different high schools and private percussion lessons at those high schools. So,
That's awesome. What is the biggest challenge you have faced, like while performing or even dealing with students?
well, those are two very different questions.
Yeah.
With students, just getting them to practice. That's it. For performing, it's sound issues. Mainly being monitoring. Being able to hear yourself on stage is huge. And being able to hear the other people on stage is huge. If you're on stage, especially for something like Diam Morte, which has a backing track, right? There's an orchestral backing track and a click track that the audience can't hear the click track, which is a metronome. So when we're performing live, if I can't hear that orchestral track, I'm gonna get off, and it's not gonna sound right.
So what are some things that you have done to improve sound live?
I love that you asked that question. So, in regards to monitoring is something that, as I was explaining earlier, it's something you use to hear yourself and others. Now, there are ways to go into a gig and not have to have any time spent on setting up a monitor mix, because it takes time on stage if you're busy setting up, especially for a show like Diam Morte where there's a backing track, there's 6 or 7 members in the band, whatever it is, it's time consuming. So I constructed what's called an in-ear monitor rack system with what's called a splitter. And this system allows the band to go into a gig already having a monitor system and specific mix for each band member set before we even hit the stage. That way we spend no time sound checking, monitoring specifically, and what we do is we show up, and that's the rack that's over here. We show up, we roll it in, and I hand the sound techs a color-coded labeled snake, and they pick whichever of the channels they want. Now on my drum set, I have 16 microphones. If they only want 8 of them, that's totally fine. And I have that partitioned off to essentials and 8 channels of essential, 8 channel non-essential. Most venues take the 8, the essential 8, and leave the rest. But the point of that is, if they don't take the non-essential stuff, the other band members will hear everything no matter what. And so I would like to basically leave nothing to chance. Leave nothing open to interpretation. And that's a huge thing. One of the biggest lessons I've learned in live performing is leave nothing to chance. Bring spares of cables, bring spares of drum heads if you need to. But so for this sound system, I wanted it to be quick, efficient, and high quality. So I've also developed, when it comes to the drum set itself, 16 channels is a lot. Plus, I have a stereo monitor mix, meaning if I want to pan things left and right, that's another 2 channels. That's 18 cables. If I want the backing track, that's another cable, right? So what is it? 19, 20 cables, however many it is. I need to condense that down and make it easier. So maybe you can sort of see it. There's also one on that side. I it started incorporating what's called the Diodario modular snake system to my drum set. And I recently posted a video on my Instagram about it, which for some reason became the most popular piece of social media I've ever posted. At this point, it's got over 16,000 views and 700 something likes, and all these people commenting, people sharing it, saving it. So it must be useful information. Maybe drummers haven't heard of this thing before, but I love this thing. And basically, it allows me to condense 8 channels into, or 8 cables, because it's still 8 channels, 8 cables into one cable that I plug directly into the in-ear monitor splitter rack. And so instead of me having 16 channels from the drum set, 2 channels stereo monitoring, and a laptop, 19 cables, now we're down to 3. Makes it super easy to set up. I'm using the wireless in-ear monitors, 2 DB25 cables, and a USB for the laptop. So it makes things super efficient, and the sound techs will love it because what's cool about the setup that I have is we're using a digital wireless mixer, and everybody has their own monitor mix. So if you were in my band and you had your own in-ear monitors and they were wireless and everything, you could go on an app on your phone and adjust your own levels in your own mix independently of anybody else while they're sound checking front of house. So while we're all on stage, checking monitoring is done by the members themselves, and checking the front of house happens simultaneously. So instead of having a 30, 60, or 90-minute sound check, we could probably do the whole thing in maybe 20 minutes.
Oh, wow. A lot of time saved.
Yes. And so that's the justification for the investment in all this stuff, is for a big show like Diam Morte, with 4 or 5 vocalists. If I'm doing backups, there's 2 guitars, there's a big old drum set, there's a backing track. It's a big production, but it has so many different components, and it has to be controlled, but it also has to be set up efficiently because of how much there is. So how do you do that? In-ear monitor splitter rack. And the point of the splitter is it takes one microphone signal and splits it into 2. So one goes to the digital wireless mixer that allows us to have our individual monitor mixes independent of the venue sound system, and then the other split off goes to the front of house where they can do everything that they're going to do with it. So I spent hours and hours and hours after our November show every day, because we didn't have that splitter system yet, researching how to do it, figuring out the best way to do it. I ordered a ton of custom cables. I tried to make everything super efficient, got into nice cable management, and took some pictures of that. And I wanted this group to have a user-friendly, easy-to-use sound system that you can just plug and play. And if we were to ever go on tour, it's an absolute must, because it takes a really long time to sound check 6 or 7 people, a big drum set like mine, and a backing track. It takes a long time to do it. So it's an investment in our future for live sound. And I'm really glad I did it, because people seem to be liking my videos on it on Instagram. So I'm just going to keep doing it. Because it seems like it's something that a lot of bands could definitely benefit from knowing more about and utilizing in their setups, because I've met other bands that have utilized it, but I've also met a number of bands that don't bring their own microphones and their own monitoring to shows, and if they had a little bit of extra knowledge, they can make their setup a lot quicker and more efficient, and their teardown, especially for drummers. What I did was I went to the hardware store and got some specific kind of screws and put a drum mount on it, because this thing doesn't cut. You see how it's kind of floating on the drum set there? It wasn't like that when I bought it. It's just this thing you could put it on the floor or on a table or something. I wanted it to be fully integrated into my kit, so when I got these custom cables made from this brand called Performance Audio, they only had to be as long as needed to reach the snake system. So efficiency. I'm all about efficiency.